Iran is not such a dictatorship after all. Unlike America's Arab allies, it tolerates criticism. And so, I wrote breezy emails to friends, saying things like, "If I don't emerge from the airport, you can have all my shoes," and boarded the plane to spend 2 weeks in Tehran. The portraits of the Dur Ayatollahs that hung above the arrival hall were so familiar to me that I didn't even look up. With enough time, I had simply stopped seeing them, their beards blending into the yellowing walls. It seemed entirely normal for a capital city in the 21st century to be covered with oversized images of turbaned clerics. For the briefest second, before I handed my passport over to the yawning female clerk in black chutter, the nonchalance my therapist would call denial faltered, and I felt a flash of dread. "Ms. Moaveni," she peered down at my passport, "this is highly irregular." I said nothing. Perhaps I would be interrogated, or maybe they would just confiscate my passport, a form of soft hostage-taking. I began to feel nervous about what might happen to me, and about how foolish I would seem for having invited it. "The stamp marking your last exit from Mehrabad is so light it is unreadable. In the future, please check and ask the passport official to use a fresh ink pad if necessary." I breathed in relief and thanked her warmly. From there, it took scant minutes to collect my suitcase and sail through customs. This in itself signaled how much Iran had changed since the late 1990s. In previous years, the process of extricating oneself from Mehrabad Airport had been a trauma in itself. When I visited Iran for the first time as an adult in 1998, customs officials roughly pried apart layers of my luggage. They triumphantly held up a dry academic book of Middle Eastern history and told me it could not enter the country without being vetted by official censors. They levied an outrageous sum of duty on a phone I had brought as a gift for my aunt, and left me to hastily repack the contents of my suitcase, struggling to keep bras and other such intimate belongings out of sight. By the time I reached the point where I would be inspected for proper Islamic dress, a headscarf that suitably covered my hair, long sleeves, and a coat that reached my knees, I was a sweaty, enraged mess, eager to reboard the first plane to the civilized world. But this time I found Iran treated its returning citizens with less arbitrary abuse than ever before. Mehrabad bustled with crowds of excited relatives greeting their kin, the acrid smell of sweat mingling with the perfume of giant bouquets. In the past 6 years, Iranians living abroad had begun returning in significant numbers for the first time since the 1979 revolution. The homecomings overwhelmed the modest capacity of Mehrabad, built in the late 1940s, and on nights like this, everyone ended up pressed up against everyone else, an intimate, jostling throng in which men and women embraced and veils slipped off entirely. I reminded myself to email my father later and describe to him how comfortably I had made it through the airport. Like many Iranian residents of the United States, my parents traveled to Iran infrequently and had little sense of how much had changed in the past 6 years. They came to the United States in the late 1960s to attend university, back when the Iranian government was closely allied with Washington and believed it needed a generation of Western-trained professionals to modernize the nation. They returned to Tehran with their American degrees, got married, and went about applying their expertise until the mid-1970s, when they followed my grandmother to California, intending to keep her company for a few short years while she received cardiac treatment at Stanford. The revolution of 1979 dashed any hopes of return to Iran, and my family ended up, along with the great influx of Iranians who fled on the eve of the uprising, as immigrants to America. For years they did not visit Iran, save one short trip when I was 5, and I grew up with the émigré child's ambivalent yearning for homeland. I encountered the real Iran only as a young adult when I visited in 1998 during a Fulbright year in Cairo. During that brief trip, I discovered the fascinating debates over Islam and democracy that were underway in Iran.